Good morning to our viewers here in the United States and all around the world. It is Tuesday, June 8th, and a bipartisan Senate report on the Capitol insurrection has just been released. And it paints a damning portrait of security lapses on multiple fronts during the January 6th riot and in the days, weeks, and months leading up to it. The report also outlines evidence of stunning intelligence failures, critical miscommunications, and unheeded warnings that ultimately led to a chaotic response that day.
The report is also notable for what is not included. There's no examination of Donald Trump's role in the insurrection. In fact, Senate Democrats even avoiding using the word insurrection to describe the events of January 6th. Whitney Wild has been poring over the report and is here to join us with the findings. What did they find, Whitney?
Well, there's a list, a very long list of security failures and misinterpretations of intelligence and really tactical problems that existed much prior to January 6th. So this report is huge. It's 100 pages. Just to give you a couple of highlights, a lot of this focused on the United States Capitol Police Department for a number of reasons, not the least of which was that's where Congress could get most of the information because Congress oversees Capitol Police Department. So a couple things that popped up in the report, decentralized intelligence that kept United States Capitol Police officials in the dark. They basically had 3 intel groups, all decentralized, and what ended up happening was the information was not shared. The information flow was significantly hampered, which became a very big problem in the days leading up to January 6th. The intel community had a really difficult time deciding what was just free speech protected by the First Amendment and what actually constituted a threat. That is something intel communities continue to struggle with. It is one of their biggest questions about how to actually have meaningful security changes while not infringing on the rights of Americans. And then finally, something we've talked a lot about, the equipment for Capitol Police was just so far below what should have been par. I mean, there were really only a handful of officers who had appropriate riot gear. Some of the officers had riot gear that was stored in a bus. When they went to access it, the bus was locked. I mean, those are just a couple of the highlights. So again, this report's like 100 pages. I could go on, but I know we want to keep it moving.
Right. Okay. Well, I don't mean to knock the report because they did some important work. They talked to 50 officers, I think, and a lot of officials. But at the same time, what's so clear is that it's not sufficient.
That's right. And Senator Gary Peters made a point of saying this yesterday in a press briefing with reporters that this was limited in scope. It is substantive, but not a substitute for the work that should have been done and should be done by an independent commission. He really drove that point home. It's almost impossible to extract the report from the politics surrounding it. I mean, the reality is the word insurrection does not appear in the report, save for quotes and in footnotes. I mean, that's by design. So it's pretty clear that there were at least some political negotiations going on here. But what lawmakers feel very proud about is that they were able to very quickly put forth this bipartisan effort to try to actually make meaningful change as fast as they could. So those were the negotiations that went on. In the end, senators insisted, even though I asked and other reporters asked if there were political pressures that drove the scope, that said, we're not going to, discuss the origins of this, the Trump role. And they insisted political pressure did not limit the scope. However, like I said, it's almost impossible to extract the two.
Well, maybe pressure, maybe they're just objecting to the word pressure, but it's clear that politics limited the scope of it. And you know what kind of investigation could perhaps use the word insurrection? A bipartisan commission, for instance. I'm just throwing that out there. For instance.
Right. I mean, there were a lot of limitations here. For example, in the report, it points out that the FBI and DHS has not been altogether forthcoming with the information that was requested. Some staffers who worked on this report said that it was frankly unsatisfactory responses to their inquiries. They have not gotten documents that they requested. Senator Roy Blunt points out that they're in the middle of the biggest criminal case for the D.C. area ever. So that would may be a logical reason that some of those answers are hampered. However, I think it's pretty alarming that a Senate report is saying, look, these intelligence agencies that were at the forefront of this and that should be providing answers are not doing so in a satisfactory way.
It definitely is. Whitney, thank you so much for that report. And those questions outstanding we are going to hopefully pursue here because we have a live interview with the person in charge of this report ahead.
All right, in a brand new CNN interview, former President Barack Obama weighing in on the current political climate, revealing he never thought the, quote, dark spirits that began rising within the Republican Party during his time in office would ultimately become the heart of the GOP.
You write about Sarah Palin, about her brief ascendancy,
Right.
and you talk about dark spirits that had long been lurking on the edges of the Republican Party coming center stage. Did you ever think it would get this dark?
No. I thought that there were enough guardrails institutionally that even after Trump was elected, that you would have the so-called Republican establishment who would say, okay, you know, it's a problem if the White House doesn't seem to be concerned about Russian meddling, or it's a problem if we have a president who's saying that, you know, neo-Nazis marching in Charlottesville, they're good people on both sides. You know, that's a little bit beyond the pale. And the degree to which we did not see that Republican establishment say, hold on, time out, that's not acceptable, that's not who we are, but rather be cowed into accepting it, and then finally culminating in January 6th, where what originally was, oh, don't worry, this isn't going anywhere, we're just letting Trump and others vent. And then suddenly you now have large portions of an elected Congress going along with the falsehood that there were problems with the election.
And the leadership of the GOP, briefly for one night when they still had the sort of scent of fear in them, going against the president.
And then poof, suddenly everybody was back in line. Now, the reason for that is because the base believed it. And the base believed it because this had been told to them not just by the president, but by the media that they watch. And nobody stood up and said, stop. This is enough. This is not true. I won't say nobody. Let me correct it. There were some very brave people who did their jobs, like the Secretary of State in Georgia, who was then viciously attacked for it. And all those congressmen started looking around and they said, you know what, I'll lose my job. I'll get voted out of office. Another way of saying this is I didn't expect that there would be so few people who would say, well, I don't mind losing my office because this is too important. America's too important.
Some things are more important than just...
Our democracy is too important. We didn't see that. Now, I'm still the hope and change guy, and so my hope is that the tides will turn, but that does require each of us to understand that this experiment in democracy is not self-executing. It doesn't happen just automatically. It happens because each successive generation says these values, these truths we hold self-evident. This is important. We're going to invest in it and sacrifice for it, and we'll stand up for it, even when it's not politically convenient.
What an interesting discussion. Joining us now, April Ryan, CNN political analyst and White House correspondent, and D.C. bureau chief for the GRIO, who has been on me from the minute she walked in the door and saw me in makeup. Also here is Brittany Shepard, White House correspondent for Yahoo News. April, notwithstanding everything you've said to me over the last 20 minutes, it's very interesting to hear former President Barack Obama speak in depth about what has happened over the last 6 months and talk about where I think he's surprised and not surprised. He was surprised that more Republicans didn't stand up for what Barack Obama thinks is right at the cost of their own jobs. What did you see there?
It goes back to who he was when he first ran for president, hope and change. He was hopeful. But the reality set in that many of these Republicans who voted against the January 6th commission, who voted against impeachment, they were trying to save their lives and their political careers. To hear him talk, it was the same person we all knew. But many of us didn't get a chance to see that publicly. to hear him talk about how his daughters, his grown daughters, are now marching in the street like many of us, black and white, supporting freedoms, supporting rights. He brought it home in a very human way, but he also talked about it from a very naive way, from someone who was at the highest office in the land, not understanding that things have changed since you were in the Oval Office.
It feels like something, I sense that from this interview. I also sense it talking to Republicans who are sort of a different era. You know, they may just be from 5-10 years ago, really, the apex of their careers, but it feels like so. I mean, Romney, it seems like, is kind of confronting what's going on. But when you talk to some of the former Obama administration officials, when you talk to Republicans who served during that time who might have found some common ground with them, you feel that naivete. But in retrospect, Obama is saying, Brittany, that, you know, he's drawing a line between the forces that he saw kind of churning on the right when he was president and what we're seeing today.
Well, yeah, I mean, the Republicanism and far-rightism in the Obama era definitely existed. These online spaces not pop up out of nowhere, right? But it's been able to be put under a pressure cooker, be it because of COVID, because of Donald Trump and all the motivating racial forces there, that we've all seen it. We've all seen it explode. And then I think what's been naive about when I've been talking to Republicans is that they keep saying that, like, the Marjorie Taylor Greens of the party are a bug. But what Democrats in the White House are telling me, they're actually just a function of where the party is now. If you look at just Republicans running for Congress, you see that folks who used to be under Trump, the Ronnie Jacks and the Sarah Sanders, they can now be enabled to run for office and win by pretty large margins.
Sarah Sanders is running for office.
Right. And that's what I'm saying. And it's just really fascinating that there was this report that came out this morning of tweets and social media behavior that was totally normalized. Bring your guns to the Capitol. Let's kill Mike Pence. And that's not seen as absolutely bat behavior. It's not. It's the way the party is now.
And there were 40,000 people with that bat behavior on Capitol Hill. What is it, about 25 to 35,000 made it through the magnetometers, the Secret Service magnetometers on the ellipse. And there was a large contingent that did not, because they had backpacks and understood that they couldn't. Now, this is from my reporting with the GRIO from Secret Service officials. There were 40,000 people on the Hill that believed what Donald Trump was saying. They believed that he was going to walk with them to the Capitol, which he did not.
He told them he was.
He told them he was.
So they had reason to believe
yet another lie that we found from the president. But think about that. Those 40,000 there and only 500 or so caught, captured, what have you. But think about the scores that are out there who didn't come, who wanted to be there in solidarity with their fellow patriots, if you will.
And Brittany, to your point, it's not a bug, it's a feature right now of people running in the Republican Party. The New York Times did a great article yesterday about how congressional candidates now are basing their candidacies on the lie. This is not some bug. This is the central driving force for many in some parts of the party right now. Friends, stand by. We have much more to discuss because the former president also got candid about race and right-wing media, saying outlets are profiting off of fears of white people.
Plus, Vice President Kamala Harris tells migrants do not come to the U.S. And now progressive Democrats are pushing back. And why is the Biden Justice Department looking to defend Donald Trump in a lawsuit over the rape accusation against him? This is New Day. As the country's first black president, former President Obama was asked if he felt that he told the story of race in America enough. And this was his response.
Look, I tried. I think I told a lot of stories. You take a look at the speeches I gave in Selma and the speech I gave during the campaign about Reverend Wright and that whole episode. And you know, each and every time I tried to describe why it is that we are still not fully reconciled with our history. But the fact is that it is a hard thing to hear. It's hard for the majority in this country of white Americans to recognize that, look, you can be proud of this country and its traditions and its history and our forefathers, and yet it is also true that this terrible stuff happened, and that the vestiges of that linger and continue. And the truth is that when I try to tell that story, oftentimes my political opponents would deliberately not only block out that story, but try to exploit it for their own political gain. I tell the story in the book about the situation where Skip Gates, a Harvard professor who's trying to get into his own house, gets arrested, and I'm asked about it. I don't know, not having been there and not seeing all the facts, what role race played in that, but I think it's fair to say, number one, any of us would be pretty angry. Number two, that the Cambridge police acted stupidly in arresting somebody when there was already proof that they were in their own home. Subsequent polling showed that my support among white voters dropped more precipitously after that that should have been a minor trivial incident than anything else during my presidency.
That's extraordinary.
Well, and it gives a sense of the degree to which these things are still, they're deep in us, and sometimes unconscious. But I also think that there are certain right-wing media venues, for example, that monetize and capitalize on stoking the fear and resentment of a white population that is witnessing a changing America.
It's so interesting to listen to him talk about his experiences in the White House, talking about race, with now everything that we have experienced here just in the last year or so. Brittany, what did you think about what he said?
Well, it made me think when he was speaking that it's not just the message, it's the messenger. When I was traveling the country 2020 and talking to white voters, particularly in places like Iowa, Democratic stronghold in many cities, even they were uncomfortable getting really down and dirty talking about race because all of it has to be self-referential. And human beings just don't want to confront their own biases. I understand, we all get that way. And especially hearing that from a black man, voters get defensive. And Republicans know that, and they can run off of that. You see, that's why you can go into the suburbs and kind of fearmonger about Antifa and BLM having guns and coming into your house and making you feel uncomfortable, because fear is a really powerful motivator. So you can kind of empathize with why Obama might have been gun shy, talking about race after what looks like an innocuous comment. Now, how many innocuous comments does Biden give every day?
Amy can win. That's the Skip Gates incident proves that Barack Obama, in my mind, couldn't win on race. If he can't get upset about Skip Gates, and how is he supposed to be able to talk about anything else?
He was the embodiment, and he still is the embodiment of race. He was a president who just happened to be black, but his campaign, and he keenly knew that if he went out there and talked about race all the time, he would lose out. When he talked about Skip Gates, he lost a certain segment of white America and never gained it back. And he's keenly aware that he wrote about it in the book, and he talked about it in this great interview with Anderson Cooper. But he talked about race with Skip Gates. He talked about race, as he said in the interview, with Jeremiah Wright. But he also talked race when he went to Selma, with then Congressman John Lewis, commemorating 50 years since that Bloody Sunday March. He talked race when we went to Africa and traveled through Africa. He talked race with Trayvon Martin, and it boggled my mind, Brianna and John and Brittany, when he said he could have been my son. I'm like, and all the reporters were like, what did he mean? What do you think he meant? He was a black man in America who was susceptible to all the things that other black men were susceptible to if he did not have Secret Service around him, and if he had a baseball cap on, even though he had that bop, he was still susceptible.
It's interesting. I think it boggles Barack Obama's mind that he still gets asked if he did enough about race. That you could see it in the way he answered the question from Anderson. I do want to bring up another subject, because it was big news overnight that I think was surprising to a lot of people, Brittany, which is that the Justice Department, the Merrick Garland-led Justice Department, is siding with former President Donald Trump on the issue of the defamation case brought by E. Jean Carroll, the writer who said that Donald Trump raped her decades ago. E. Jean Carroll sued Trump for defamation for his response to this lawsuit. And then the Bill Barr Justice Department said, you can't sue a president for defamation for something like this because he was acting in his role as president. So the suit carries over now, and then Merrick Garland's taking the side basically of the Barr Justice Department, saying we don't think that Trump can be sued here. This is surprising, I think, to a lot of progressives, and Biden even sort of mentioned this during the campaign.
Well, yeah, and when you look at the note that Merrick Garland's team put out, they said, well, we don't agree with anything that Trump said. He was cruel, his actions we don't condone, but he was acting as president, and it is interesting to see him and the department fall in line with what the Trump administration was saying. But honestly, when you talk to Biden advisors, I'm not as shocked because the last thing they want is Trump up on Capitol Hill, taking up all of the airspace, even if they do believe that he has to answer for his crimes, because then every question in the briefing is about Trump. The midterm messaging then just becomes about Trump. And it becomes a distraction even more than all the other things that we have to deal with right now. Talk about infrastructure, talk about guns, talk about voting rights. You guys all know all of the legislative hobnobbery that needs to happen. So aides are quietly, pleased with how this is going, but it still is shocking to see Trump and Biden on the same team here.
Because objectively, it is good that an administration is striving to put norms back in the Justice Department, right? Objectively, that is good.
Normal. He was not normal.
I'm talking about this administration, but progressives must look at this and go, what the heck, really? You're going to defend this one?
Exactly. And you're talking about bringing norms back. But again, Donald Trump was not normal. He's not a normal person, and he was not a normal president. He was extreme in every way. But one of the reasons Donald...
Is this misguided then in your estimation of trying to reestablish norms, but maybe this isn't the hill to die on?
So let me explain it this way. Covering Donald Trump for those 4 years, he pushed hard from day one, that re-election bid from day one when he walked in the Oval Office. He wanted to be reelected. One of the main reasons was because he did not want to face court actions against him. He is now he's civilian. He doesn't have the immunity anymore. And knowing what I know about the fact, again, that he did not want to face this and he wanted another term, that's saying a lot.
Yeah. Look, this is unique. In the Biden White House, we are told, did not know about this decision from the Merrick Garland Justice Department. I think that's important to note. And the second thing here, this deals with the former President Donald Trump in his role as president, which, again, so says the Justice Department, which is different than some of the other things he faces. But I take all your points here. It's great to see you in person here, right?
I'm glad you're in D.C. Well, come back, John.
Did it meet your expectations?
You have met the bar. You have exceeded the bar exceedingly and abundantly.
The admittedly low bar based on what we were talking about before. No, it's very nice to see you in person, April.
So we have a lot more ahead from our CNN interview with Barack Obama, what he said about the role that right-wing media companies have in dividing Americans.
Plus, Vice President Kamala Harris issues a stern warning to migrants: do not come to the United States.
In his wide-ranging interview with CNN, former President Obama laments the deep divisions that define so many facets of American society, and he blames in part a media landscape that he says preys on fear. Let's listen.
I also think that there are certain right-wing media venues, for example, that monetize and capitalize on stoking the fear and resentment of a white population that is witnessing a changing America and seeing demographic changes, and do everything they can to give people a sense that their way of life is threatened and that people are trying to take advantage of them. And we're seeing it right now, right, where you would think, with all the public policy debates that are taking place right now, that the Republican Party would be engaged in a significant debate about how are we going to deal with the economy, and what are we going to do about climate change, and what are we going to do about, lo and behold, the single most important issue to them apparently right now is critical race theory. Who knew That was the threat to our republic.
He actually said, and we're here with John Harwood, our White House correspondent. He actually said, John Harwood, that the reason this idea, I thought it was so interesting. He said, poof, suddenly everyone was back in line talking about how for a moment after the January 6th insurrection, you had Republicans who sort of stood up and said, you know, like a spade is a spade. And then they turned back around, fell in line, and he blames the right-wing media for that.
Well, I think right-wing media is part of it. But like with Donald Trump, these are reactions to the way the country is changing that he referred to. When Donald Trump was growing up, whites were the overwhelming majority of the American population. So were Christians. And you could make a good living as a blue-collar worker going straight out of high school to a factory. All of those things are changing. The country's becoming less white, less Christian, requiring higher levels of education. And so right-wing media, Fox News in particular, right-wing politicians do, in fact, have as their main objective stoking fear and resentment among people who think that they are being left behind by the country. That's why when you had Charlottesville, the chant was, "You will not replace us," because people are afraid they're being replaced. It's why former right-wing politicians sell survival rations to old people who are scared, or they urge people to put their money in gold because your money's not going to be worth anything. That's why Donald Trump in his campaign said, "You're not going to have a country anymore." That is targeted to a specific group of people, a subset of the white population, to make them afraid. And that's what it's about.
You have interesting insight. Brianna noted during the break that the former president didn't use the word Fox. He seemed to avoid it. He said right-wing media. You have unique insight to this. I also want to make one other note there. You know, Barack Obama said critical race theory. I guarantee you that he just gave Fox, which he would not mention, a full day of programming by even speaking the words out loud, critical race theory.
Well, why critical race theory? The reason is because it is targeted at white people who are afraid they're being supplanted. And the message is that people with brown skin and weird white liberals are coming to get you. They're coming to take away your barbecue. They're coming to take away your hot dogs and your traditions. You know, early in President Obama's term, I interviewed him at the White House, and he said, you know, I've got an entire network, Fox News, dedicated to attacking me. And he got a lot of blowback from Fox, some blowback from others in the press saying, oh, you're attacking the press. But the reality is that though there are good journalists at Fox, the principal point of the network is to fan these fears, and that is a source of their popularity, their grip on their audience. And the same is true of President Trump. That's why people rally to President Trump, is because he told people, I can turn back the clock on those changes. Make America great again. That is a backward-looking message. Remember, the Republican Party had no platform last year. They were not embracing a set of public policy solutions, a set of governing solutions. It was rally to us. We're going to protect you from those people.
John Harwood, great to see you in person.
You bet.
All right, Vice President Kamala Harris taking a stern tone with would-be migrants during her first foreign trip. This morning, a reaction from progressives.
Plus, the billionaire space race is heating up between Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk. More on the 15-year rivalry between two of the richest men in the world coming up. Vice President Kamala Harris is waking up in Mexico this morning, where she arrived last night as part of her two-country tour. She is set to meet with Mexico's president today after discouraging would-be migrants from making the trip to the United States. CNN's Jeremy Diamond is live for us from Mexico City. Jeremy, it was what she said, and it was also how she said it, this stern warning to migrants.
No doubt about it. Listen, Vice President Kamala Harris came to the region to try and address the root causes of migration. She said that she was also there to provide hope to people living in Guatemala, to discourage them from coming to the United States. And we saw some of that hope provided in the form of millions of dollars in new investments that were announced, an anti-corruption task force. But ultimately, the loudest message that she delivered was this. Listen.
I want to be clear to folks in this region who are thinking about making that dangerous trek to the United States-Mexico border. Do not come. Do not come.
And she went on to say that migrants who come to the U.S.-Mexico border, that they will be turned around. And while that is true for the majority of migrants who present at the U.S.-Mexico border, unaccompanied children are, by and large, being admitted into the United States. And that has been one of the main conundrums and one of the main factors here playing a role in the surge of unaccompanied minors that we have seen at the U.S.-Mexico border. And this is kind of the balancing act that we have seen from the Biden administration. Yes, they have implemented more humane policies at the border, rolling back many of those Trump-era policies. But at the same time, there is a feeling in Central America that perhaps the Biden administration's policies and its rhetoric have contributed to that surge. And so the vice president trying to make very clear, while she was in Guatemala, one of the countries where you are seeing tens of thousands of migrants head to the United States, that is not the message. And instead, she was telling them, do not come. At the same time, there were those other policies that she was trying to put in place to address some of these longer-term, more systemic issues in the region. Brianna.
All right, Jeremy Diamond, live for us from Mexico City. Thank you for that. Some of the biggest websites in the world are currently offline due to a massive internet outage. We're going to have more on this breaking news just ahead.
Plus, Moderna's CEO offering a new timeline about when children as young as 5 can expect to get vaccinated.
This morning, the 15-year rivalry between billionaires Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk is intensifying after Bezos announced that he'll be on board when his company Blue Origin launches its first space tourism flight next month. Christine Romans is joining us now on this. All right, there's some competition here, Christine.
Oh, a space race among the billionaires. You know, Brianna, the world's richest man has poured billions of dollars into Blue Origin. That's his rocket ship company. He calls this, quote, the most important work I am doing. Jeff Bezos and his brother will be aboard the New Shepard July 20th, rocketing 60 miles above Earth, an 11-minute flight. If this trip happens,